What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. That's right. This is the podcast where we bring you audiological ingredients to brew your own faith. We want you to keep it zesty. We don't want to think for you. We want to think with you. And I just try to get the most amazing, diverse, inspiring collection of thinkers I can. Get them here, send you the audio, and then you brew as you wish. You know what I mean? That's right. Just trying to increase the theological biodiversity of the church. Well, today on the podcast is Todd Outcalt, right? He's going to be on here. We're going to talk about his book, The Other Jesus, Stories from World Religions. And it also crosses over to another recent book of his, Common Ground, Lessons and Legends from the World's Great Faiths. Now, he, as you'll hear, is a minister who also writes and publishes all the time. He loves writing. You hear in this conversation stuff we don't always talk about on the podcast when it's normally like a professor or something. You hear here, like, what is it like to be an author who publishes and writes regularly and preaches, weekly? And how do you hook together the creative task of sermon writing and meeting your congregation and serving that community with the creative tasks of, writing for a general audience and trying to educate, the church at large. And both of these books, the most recent books, are ones where he is writing out of the experience doing, interfaith dialogue, learning and wrestling with other religions and how that shaped and inspired his faith. And this book, the one we spend the most time talking about, The Other Jesus, is fascinating because it really looks at the person of Jesus and how he shows up or connections to be made in other religions. Now, if you're a normal podcast listener, you might not be super edgy. You're down. You're down with religious pluralism, down with mutually transforming interactions between religions. But why I like this book and wanted to have him on is just the data that he brings in, like the quotes and the connections, whole passages out of different sacred texts across the world could be very useful to ministers today. The other part of it is this is a topic that is very challenging if you're in a congregation where people may assume a much more narrow understanding of one's relationship, to other religions. And I thought he would give both the pastoral side, give you some content in a text you could go look at, and we did. We talk about it. So I hope you enjoy it, and it's going to happen in just a minute. But first, I just want to tell you just a couple things. Peter Rollins and I are going to be in Denver, and then we're going to Oklahoma City in August. We're doing a camp meeting. That's right. It's like a revival. Or maybe if that makes you want to come, it is a revival. It's called Theology Beer Camp. Peter Rollins, he told me last night at my birthday party, he said, Tripp, the Holy Ghost has got a philosophically inspired sermon that probably quotes a Khan and C.S. Lewis in it. That's what he said. I'm going to drop it at beer camp. People are going to come to Jesus, and I'm going to touch souls. I'm going to bring the tears out. And he said, and at the end of it, you're going to get rebaptized. That's what he told me. See, Pete, do you disagree? No. See, I offered him the microphone. He said nothing. He just was like, that's exactly right, Tripp. That's what I said. So if you live anywhere near Denver or Oklahoma City, the last half of August, we're going to be there. We're going to be in Denver the weekend of the 18th, doing Theology Beer Camp. Then we're going to be in Oklahoma City the next weekend, which is in the 20s, because a week, 7 days. We're going to be having some fun between the 2 days, We're going to do it. We're going to do it upright, and it's going to be awesome. There'll be, when you get a ticket, there are a whole bunch of local craft breweries. They're going to be bringing beverages for you to taste, to sample the goods. You are going to get, Pete and I have some talks we'll do. We'll have some interactions. We'll do some Q&A. We're going to play theological games. We're going to do some live podcasts. We're going to play some cornhole, do some karaoke at night, smoke cigars, and fix all the problems of the world. Because that's what you do at 1 a.m. with theology nerds. It's going to be a grand old time. So the reason to skip Theology Beer Camp is not a very good reason. Well, there are good reasons, right? So I don't want you, if you have a real one, that's fine. But if you have like a baby reason, you know, I say carpe diem, you know? You went, oh, well, you know, I don't actually live near there. I would have to drive or get one of those, like, the summer fair tickets from Southwest, get dropped off, because we actually have camp counselors at Theology Beer Camp. There are camp counselors for both locations. They'll help you find a place to stay on the cheap, or maybe a couch to surf on, depending on how you flow. So there's camp counselors ready to make the experience excellent. Now, just saying that. So go to theologybeercamp.com. Get the details. Get your ticks. If you have a question about it, then you want to holler on the Twitter. That's what I like. Twitter at Tripp Fuller. Plus also, ILF in Denver, they're going to be one of the sponsors for Beer Camp. And that means that you should eagerly anticipate the goods that ILF is going to be contributing to Beer Camp. Because we're going to be one of the stops, right, in Denver. That's hometown for ILF. It's the Progressive Methodist School in flyover country. But I know Denver says they're not flyover country. I think we'll settle this at Beer Camp. That's it. We'll settle it there. What I'll do is I will challenge any member of the camp counselors in Denver to a karaoke battle. We'll pick a song and we'll rotate verses. We'll pick in. Y'all pick, but it's a Stone Temple Pilots song. All right, let's do that. See, because you know the Rockies, they're made of stone, even though they're not from Denver at all. But Stone Temple Pilots song from the first 3 albums. None of those other ones. Got to be one of the first 3 albums. We'll rotate verses, sing the chorus and junk. And if you bring the heat and you blow me out of the water, I'll stop calling Denver a flyover country. Yeah, you hear that? Yeah, that's right, Denver. Oklahoma, they don't care if you call them flyover country because they don't want people that live in LA and New York to stay long. They're happy with it. They're like flyby, visit for a day or two. Just don't take our basketball players. Like you gotta leave the NBA team. They love it. They love the Thunder. You're like, leave that. But other than that, like, just go on by. That's why I like Colorado. They know who they are. Like if I said, no, y'all are not flyover country. You are flyover coastal elites. You are coastal elites without an ocean. Then they would say, whoa, that's it, Tripp. Got karaoke battle. And maybe we should have a karaoke battle. Charlie, the godfather of homebrewed Christianity, he has working with the local breweries there. He's got some amazing stuff happening. But I don't know if I've ever seen him karaoke. So Charlie, that's right. I'm just calling you out. And Dan in Denver, don't you know, yesterday Peter Rollins said, Tripp, I want to do a duet with Dan. So now you know Dan, he wants to do a duet with you. And I said, your duet with Dan won't be as cool as Janelle and I's duet. You hear that? Yeah, so that's like a duet battle right there going to go down. Karaoke style. All right. I'm not even going to tell you all the other stuff I was supposed to say because I forgot because I got excited about Beer Camp. So you just come to Beer Camp. We're reading Bernard Loomer's 2 Powers essay for Epic Reads. So that's everyone in the Homebrew Community group. So if you want to join, you'll get the PDF. I'll talk about it. Then we'll all be on the video stream, answering questions, throwing out ideas and stuff. It's like a giant nerd hangout, and all you have to do is read one article to participate, or just pretend to read it, but just come online and hang out. So if you want to be part of the Homebrewed community, just go to homebrewedcommunity.com. When you get there, you sign up, you get in the Facebook group, you get all the invites to the live hangouts, stuff like that. Next time we're going to talk about some power and process with Bernard Loomer coming up. All right, here it is. Time to talk with Todd, minister, author, and a man who just tries to bring wisdom from all the different world religions, hand it to you in a way that you can encounter it, engage it, and again, it's an excellent resource for ministers, the book, The Other Jesus. All right, See y'all later. Peace. Well, hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and today we are going to be talking about the other Jesus. Now, he may still be in your heart, but a lot of other people, other than Christians, have things to say about Jesus. And our guest, Todd, is ready to talk about his new book, surprisingly titled The Other Jesus. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about all the different places across religions and the globe and stuff that Jesus shows up as a character, as a figure, maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, well, I'm a United Methodist pastor, actually 35 years in the making. Been local church pastor all those years, and but I've also had opportunities to have many discussions, forums with people of other faiths and interfaith dialogue, interreligious dialogue, and I've really always enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed hearing what other people had to say about Jesus, and then making some comparisons and contrasts with the Christian view of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Well, so as a UMC minister who also writes and publishes quite a bit, how do you see those two voices relating? Like the process of working through, sermon prep and leading church council and all that kind of stuff connected to developing writing as a craft for a public audience?
That is a good question. I think that, over the years, that's the other thing. I've always been a writer as well. I started writing when I was a teenager, started having things published, and then kind of got into book publishing as well as writing for a lot of magazines. And so, in part, the craft of crafting a sermon can be rather similar to crafting, let's say, an essay. Well, it could also be very different because I tend to deliver my sermons out of an outline. I don't really write a manuscript as such. I don't know if that's where you're going, but I've also enjoyed just learning new things. I think for me, writing is an act of learning. It's an act of education. So a lot of times people ask, you write about things you know about or things that you don't know about, and it's kind of a combination of both. But I enjoy writing about things I don't know about because that's how I learn. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you're thinking of book project to book project, I noticed that you've published on all sorts of different topics. So I have. And I know a lot of ministers listen to this podcast, and they're probably thinking, how in the world does Todd stay employed for 35 years as a minister and publish 25 books? Because he's got to have a secret to how you have the rhythm for research and writing, and also, the attention. And it's not like, books that just happen to have been my sermons. These are, they're individual endeavors into different topics. So what's your kind of creative pattern or rhythm look like?
Very good question too. I have always thought of myself as a United Methodist in this regard because I'm very disciplined when it comes to writing. Over the years, I found that I do most of my writing. I get up early in the morning. I'm kind of an old guy now, so I don't maybe require as much sleep, but I can get up very early in the morning and start writing. And then I tend to write sometimes in the evenings as well. So I really try to maintain a pace in thinking about, how much do I need to produce today? So it is a rhythm. Yeah, it's a great word to use. It's a rhythm. It's a discipline. It's really my life. It's something that I've done for so many years now. It's just part of the fabric of my daily life.
Mm-hmm. When was this book born? Like, what was the origin story? Because as a minister, you mentioned being parts of lots of different interfaith dialogues and things, but
yes.
The decision to try to speak, out of or on behalf of those friendships and those relationships, that's not something that's, easy to come to. So I imagine there's a sweet origin story.
There very much is. When I was in college, I actually worked side by side with two other students from Iran. This was back in the late 70s when there were a lot of Iranian students, particularly at my alma mater, Indiana State University. And I had some wonderful dialogue, some just daily. We would talk about faith, and one was a Jew, the other one was a Muslim. from Iran. And so our conversations were very rich, but it was also born out of friendship. I mean, we were friends. And then from there, I've had many other experiences over the years where, again, I've had opportunities to lead forums, to participate in forums. And this book, actually, the idea for this book took place many years ago, but I only in more recent years have had the opportunity to actually write it. Mm-hmm. So you might say it's something of it's a thought process that's been going on for decades, really, mm-hmm. And trying to put this book together.
So what is it that those friendships, those experiences, when as an author, does it click over and you go, all right, I'm ready to, put pen to paper, metaphorically, because you probably typed.
Yes, I do. It actually, for me, it really goes back to finding someone who wants to publish the book. So I really started with some conversations. I've had long contacts also in the publishing world. I follow editors around to the various publishing houses. I love going to New York City and just interfacing with editors and publishers, something I've done for a long time. And so being able to find a publisher, first of all, that wanted to approach a project like this was the first step. And then just really delving into it and doing the research and having the ongoing conversations and with the experts, with the people who know more than I do.
Mm-hmm. So where did your relationship with Jesus begin? Like when you title something, yes, The Other Jesus, it's kind of assuming an audience and a story and a frame of reference.
Tripp, I grew up in a very small community, little town in Indiana, came out of a very small United Methodist church, one of those churches where everyone knew each other. I mean, mm-hmm. whether we were younger or older alike. And then I became very involved. There was a pastor who was a deep influence in my life who really, I guess, brought me to faith. I always, of course, growing up in the church, I always heard about Jesus, but really, I mean, Jesus becoming very personal to me was out of that relationship that I have with a pastor who invited me to become a part of helping to lead worship and becoming involved in some other leadership in the church. So that's really where my relationship with Christ really, I think, sunk in, took hold, and my faith began to grow from there, probably when I was, early teens.
Mm-hmm. So from thinking back to divinity school and such, what are the, if you were making your kind of Christology book list of the theologians who help kind of flesh out the idea for you in your ongoing ministry, who would you say is on that book list?
Well, there would be many, I think. One, the writer, theologian from Drew University, Thomas Oden was very influential. I love this pastoral theology book. I think it's still kind of considered a classic among pastors. And I remember reading that many, many times through, thinking about my own pastoral theology and, what the theology that shaped my ministry. And then thinking about deeper theologians, those who wrote systematic theology. I love reading Paul Tillich. I don't understand what Paul Tillich's talking about, but I love his language, which was, the center of his theology was language, how we use language. And then, of course, Barth, and there are others, but just being able to study theology and think of all the various nuances and differences there was an astounding experience.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, in the first chapter, the first other Jesus is the Jesus in the early church, right? And I think that's important and really helpful for the book in general, because a lot of people will assume the Jesus they experience in the church and have been taught and such is it sounds a whole lot like as it's always been taught and understood. And in that kind of beginning with the early church opens up space, I think, for Christians to recognize the diversity just within us, let alone, once you turn it out to all of the world's religions.
I believe there really was a greater diversity than we can imagine until maybe the 3rd century, 4th century. First of all, the canon was being put together, the scriptures, and people were talking about, what are the books that we want to include in our canon, what is that we hold as scripture. And so there were all those conversations going on. And then you had alternative communities like the Desert Fathers. I think there were Desert Mothers too, but these individuals, much akin to some of the conversations we're having today, like with the Bruderhof and other communities that are saying we really need to have a community unto ourselves. Not that we don't interface with the world, but as we think about what Christian community really is and the shape of it. But the Desert Fathers really, I think, they were the first to have a unique theology and understanding and teaching around the person and the teachings of Jesus in terms of, relationships and parables that are not part of our scripture, but yet they were parables that taught the very things that Jesus taught.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, you go into trying to explain to more like lay readers how the early church had a fight about ousia. Now, as a theology PhD, I am always down to have a fight about this. There's a section in my dissertation about it. But I'm interested in the place where in your ministry a topic like that matters, like the debate around ousia and Athanasius, and you tell a story and Origin and such. Like, what is that debate from the early church about our understanding as Christians about Jesus connect to how you see your own articulation of the gospel and faithful practice as a minister?
Perhaps it might not actually intersect with where most people are living out their faith. I think some of these historic discussions, historic arguments, but yet at the same time, I mean, obviously those debates and even the very words that we use to describe the Christian faith have shaped the Christian community as it exists today, because we see the various ways that the church is manifest, whether we're Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox. So some of those go back to, how the early church was shaped by those conversations. And of course, we have to live with them today. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I just saw a recent, this was I believe a poll, a church poll that showed that it was something like almost 50% of all of the Catholics in America don't know how to articulate the idea of transubstantiation, which is really phenomenal. I think when you think about it, that, there are these parts of our faith that are very central to how we understand church. And at the same time, many people in the pew really can't articulate what that's about. Mm-hmm.
So when you spend time looking at Jesus under Jewish terms, like as a rabbi and things like, what was it, or what do you hope readers to discover that they may not, naturally bring to the conversation until they really take these other perspectives at looking at Jesus?
I really think when we look at the Gospels, I mean, Jesus was often called rabbi, mm-hmm. Which that word means my teacher. And then Jesus, like the traditions of all of the rabbis of the time, had disciples. The disciples were those who followed the rabbi, who learned from the rabbi. And there were many other famous rabbis of the time that gave birth to what we know of today as a Talmud. This long history of the oral traditions that existed among the Jewish people from probably around 200 to the Common Era 200. A long period of time, but Jesus was a part of all that discussion. And we can think of some other very famous rabbis like Hillel and Shammai and the debates there between, more liberal, conservative understandings of Judaism. But Jesus fits into that. And so when you think about Jesus, for example, teaching in story, teaching in parable, well, that was not unique. I mean, all the rabbis taught in form of story and parable. And that's evidenced in the Gospels themselves.
Yeah. And the one of the things that I think comes out in the book is the way in which there's a constant interplay between the text of a tradition or the story, the parables, the community that's reading and interpreting them, and then the situation that the community's in when they do it. And I know as a minister, there's a tension because oftentimes because of the gift of theological education and such, we could end up more informed than a lot of the people listening. And we are then sitting there with this larger conversation the church has had about a text in our head, and the conversations we've had with the community that we're serving in our head, and are trying to negotiate how we interpret the text in a life-giving way for people. And that's like the experience of doing that, week after week has got to shape the way you see like the stories of Jesus in the Gospels functioning. Like how is that ongoing rhythm of tending to the text in a big vision and also tending to the same souls week after week shaped how you come to reading the New Testament and the Gospels?
Well, I would say, first of all, I have to be shaped by it. So, as I'm reading the scripture, I often ask myself maybe some basic questions like what is trying to be communicated through this text, or what would the situation out of which this text arose? I mean, were there conversations happening in the first century? Were there tensions? And then likewise, thinking about then my community, my people, and where we're living, and then where are those connections? And I think that's really what a great sermon is trying to find the connections between what is it that we're struggling with today, what are the questions that we have today, but then what were those very same questions that were maybe shaping the early community in the church, and where do we find the commonalities, and how do we express it?
Mm-hmm. When you started to work on this book, which of all the different world religions did you think that chapter was going to be the scariest to write?
I thought going in that one of those would be around Eastern religion. In particular, thinking, were there any connections, for example, between Taoism and Buddhism? And of course, as I really got into the teachings of Buddha, I was fascinated to find that there were many connections, similarities, let's say, between the teachings of Buddha and the teachings of Jesus. And likewise, some of the Taoistic teaching were very similar to what Jesus taught. Now, of course, there's great disparity there too, but it really is fascinating to see that some of the same ideas and some of the same concepts existed in both of these, probably faith religions that really didn't have any common intersection at all. Mm-hmm. But yet they're there.
Yeah, one of the differences I think is that there's a history that Jesus comes out of a Jewish history and has a very big role in the Quran and Islam. So,
yes.
Just starting out, we could have just thought that the Eastern one was going to be the gospel where Jesus goes to India.
Yes.
Between 12 and 30 or something like that. And so what was when you went into reading, from different Eastern religions, thinking about the story of Jesus being there, how did you understand it? Right? Like, I think some of us could say, like, some could be like, oh, well, they saying things similar to Jesus, or the God that was present in Christ is present in these traditions, and that's how you can identify similar things. Or how do you honor the difference of the other religion, but also come to it wanting to know where the presence of Jesus is in it?
One of those interesting points of connection there would be, and again, this is something I did not know until I started really delving into the book, but that there were missionaries in the Orthodox tradition that had actually gone to Asia. And out of their missionary work, there were really other gospels born that were written in the Eastern mindset. And I was fascinated to find that existed. And so some of the wording that's used, there was a whole gospel written around the actual words or the ideas of the Tao, but yet they're Christian in terms of their orientation and their understanding of Jesus as the way, which is interesting because the Tao means the way. Mm-hmm. And so the missionaries were trying to say, well, as we think about the way, what about looking to Jesus as the way? And the shape of that is really remarkable. And then thinking about how we can connect in a modern time, a contemporary time, with some of these same conversations, I find delightful, because there are those conversations that we can have with people even of disparate faiths.
Mm-hmm. So what did you think of? What do you think those kind of the main connection points between the two were?
I think there it might be more of in the line of, especially if you think of Buddha's teaching, that Buddha taught compassion and taught. There are differences, of course, but a passionate life. Jesus as well. We think about Jesus' teaching. Turn the other cheek. Learn to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, these are very similar to Buddhist teachings. And so I really love reading Buddhist thought as well, because in reading more of Buddha, I really learn more about Jesus. It helps me to really understand more of the depth of what Jesus has to say. And I love the ending of Albert Schweitzer's book, Quest of the Historical Jesus, where he talks about there that, in our striving and our finding, in our desire to find Jesus, we will find him if we seek him.
Yeah, the questions I think that so often drive our interactions in between religious traditions are based off kind of problematic ways of framing interfaith dialogues. And as a minister, you get brought into them a lot. And I've had experiences during interfaith dialogues and conversations where you got done and it felt wrong and you really weren't sure why. And then other ones where you're like, oh, something really beautiful just happened. And what was it?
Yes.
So if you were thinking of giving advice on how not to do interfaith dialogue, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, I would go back to, I love to listen. In fact, my message Sunday was just about how we listen to other people's testimonies. How do we listen to the witness that others have? And to me, whenever I'm in dialogue with others, particularly others of faith, other faiths, to be a good listener is a great starting point. And if everyone is approachable and comes into the dialogue with the understanding, well, I'm going to listen first and then talk later, there's something beautiful that can happen out of that.
Mm-hmm. How do you think, especially in the United States, kind of recognizing the culture dominance of Christianity, how do you see that shaping the way we listen or even set the table so that everyone feels safe to be a full participant?
That is problematic because there again, so often when we come into interfaith dialogue, maybe we're approaching it from a position of power or some type of authority. Whereas if we are able to put that aside, at least for a time, and really listen, something wonderful can happen out of that. I think just also being maybe aware that we might want to set some parameters maybe with the conversation. Maybe we wouldn't want to disparage, another person's understanding or their faith, and that we're going to seek maybe some commonalities, or maybe we're going to be open to finding truth in other places. Then I think something wonderful can happen out of that too.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've noticed is that oftentimes when we've hosted at church interfaith dialogues or gone to other communities and been a part of them, that lay people of minority faiths have a lot more working knowledge of their tradition
yes.
and their faith, and a lot of Christians just assume everyone knows what our words mean. They may not even know what the words mean, and and that makes like dialogue hard, but it's also, for me, at least as a minister, is a situation where they realize how much unexamined blank space exists in their perspective.
So true. In fact, one of the most challenging interfaith dialogues I've had in the past 5 years was we were invited, several of us from different faiths, to come to a local school. It was a social studies class. But I'll tell you what, Tripp, learning how to field the questions from these children was very demanding. Because, I mean, kids ask questions that you think, wow, where did that one come from? And you really have to kind of go back and start at a different place. Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, a lot of times we assume that people know all of this. And so I found myself having to go back to something like very basic. Like, okay, we have a concept of God, first of all. You know, we have a concept of a creator. And then where do we go from there with the idea that there's one creator that made everything? And then how do we understand in the work of Jesus from there?
Yeah, it definitely sets up. And it can also, as a minister, make you pretty embarrassed when someone from your congregation repeatedly asks questions that are just full of a level of ignorance from about your neighbor's tradition. That I know early when I guess, how old was I? I don't know, early 20s, so not too long after div school, something like that happened. And after that, I'm like, that's it. I'm gonna have to preach for 4 weeks trying to convince you to be in other religions just so you don't say stupid things. It amazes me how the scripture says not to slander pretty consistently and not to bear false witness. And then Christians, their entire missiology is usually set up by, just enough about the other to tell them how they're wrong and they should be like you. And
yes,
and that's
so true.
And I think that's one of the things that's helpful about your book is in each of the sections engaging different traditions, you draw out those parallels, but you also in not just like parallel teachings and stories, that's there, but also kind of parallel thrust of piety. I don't know like the best way of describing it, but that there are parts of each religious tradition where they're calling you to be formed in similar ways.
I love that thought. I think that's so true. Where can we find those commonalities where faith calls us to be reformed, to take a new approach to life's challenges or difficulties, but also to find where we're finding the divine, where we're finding the connections with being able to care for each other. I mean, I think that's why, in particular, for example, in the Muslim faith, there's a long string of stories about Jesus, but they come almost directly out of what we call the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, the similarities there are so incredibly alike. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. No, well, that might be a good place to pause just for a second to say a bit about what Muslims who across the globe have significantly less theological flexibility than Christians believe about Jesus. Because I can't remember, someplace in there you kind of just listed out a series of kind of affirmations about Jesus that are they're there. But I know that, I mean, part of it is probably the kind of war civilizations rhetoric that shows up and terrorism and things. But Islam tends to be the religion where we have a whole lot in common, and yet large numbers of Christians, it's like their ears are just clogged up from finding places of contact between the two.
Absolutely true. We have so much in common. In fact, I just attended, it was a talk given by a delightful Muslim lady with another group of Christians here in our community. And she really went through just the whole theological scope of Islam. And then she talked about some of these connections, that historically that Muslims have had with Christians. And it's so much richer and broader than people realize. Obviously there's differences, but she was talking about how certainly around the person of Jesus, we can have conversation, whereas with conversations between Jews and Christians, we find more difficult to do that. There's more tension to do that around Jesus. But with Muslim and Christian, we have that understanding in common. Jesus was a great prophet in the Muslim tradition. In fact, the greatest of the prophets before Muhammad, the prophet of love, the prophet of peace. So how do we dialogue there is a great beginning point.
Yeah, and all the way down to that Jesus was born of a virgin is in the Quran,
yes.
And
in the Quran.
That Jesus was the Messiah who came in the world to bring good news. Like the overlap is significant. One time I joked with a friend that given the flexibility affirmation of the virgin conception of Jesus has in Protestantism, there might be more Muslims that believe in the virgin conception than Christians on the globe.
That may very well be true.
Yeah, that's what I know. I joked about it. Then I thought, wait, let's how do we do this math? So when you are going back through and reading your book and editing it and things, what were like your takeaways at having gone through the journey? Because I imagine that you spend a lot of time on each chapter, so you're like reading
yes.
a lot in that tradition and synthesizing it and putting it back, and that the big picture and what comes out of it didn't come until like receiving back each chapter's the content of each chapter together.
I love that idea because, at the end of the Gospel of John, there's that wonderful passage that says that not even all the books in the world could contain everything that we could say about Jesus. And so writing this book for me was sort of a journey into that place where I realized that I cannot contain Jesus. I mean, Jesus contains so much more than I can ever understand about him. It really just solidified my faith all the more that Jesus is someone who is to be studied and to be cherished and to be loved. I mean, we cannot even begin to describe everything that Jesus is to us as Christian people, but also we think about Jesus as the hope of the world. There's so much more that we can say.
Mm-hmm. Well, so when you got done with this, and I could imagine being in conversation with people of other faith, especially if you've written a book like this, and the question I would regularly get asked from ministers in other religious traditions is, so do you really think you should just convert me? Like we sit here, we get to know each other, we're blessed by each other. Like, do you still think I need to convert? And so like how do you wrestle with that response when the assumption from so many other religious leaders is that our primary relationship to the religious other is as a potential one of us?
I go back, I guess, just personally, that my goal as a pastor is to proclaim the good news of Jesus, and what God does with that good news, I mean, that's up to God. But I don't see my task as trying to convert people from other faiths to Christianity. I mean, I think that there's dialogue that can take place where we can each help each other and be shaped by each other's faith tradition. But at the same time, when we think about all the difficulties that exist in our world, particularly around faith and around our various faith traditions, there's something to be said for that. If Jesus we believe Jesus as the Prince of Peace, well, how can we build that peace? We have to have the dialogue to build the peace. We have to be willing to shape that peace outside of just thinking that we're going to convert the world. We're going to convert other people, bring them to our way of thinking. Jesus is that big, I think. I mean, Jesus is that wonderful that we can see him as the hope of the world, the Prince of Peace, and yet not think that we have to convert other people to our faith.
So you talk about Jesus and other religions, which, has that kind of historical reference to the person, the historical person, Jesus. What do you think about Christ in other religions? Like, why Jesus? Or did this process make you think about like more cosmic images of Christ?
There is that early image of Jesus as the Pantocrator, the King of all things, the King of creation. I mean, there's all the early images in the church of Christ holding the world, in his hand. And there certainly are so many other expressions of Jesus, not just in Islam, not just in Eastern faith. I love the Sufi expression of Jesus. There's so many rich, warm parables there about Jesus. But thinking about Christ in other faiths, I'm just always astounded by it, that Jesus occupies a place in so many other ways of thinking about God. And so Jesus really is a linchpin, if you will, for dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So I know one of the other books that you wrote was Before I Say I Do, which
yes.
I don't know how many people have been told to read that book and how many of them actually read it, but it is a very popular a book to read as you're going through premarital counseling. So I'm interested in what kind of advice you would be giving to multi-faith families or ones in which like a connection in faith to Jesus is shared, the religious tradition that they would identify in are different. Like how do you imagine a family, a multi-faith family, kind of addressing those issues as they approach creating a family together?
Wow. Well, Before You Say I Do was actually the first book that I had published. I think it was back in 1998 that the first edition came out. I think it's been in three editions now. But I've known several interfaith families over the years, and I think that the first thing there has to be is respect. There has to be love and respect. And Jesus taught, how we love one another, but caring for each other. And so couples that, first of all, just don't have a foundation of love and mutual respect, then they probably won't be able to have those conversations that are helpful and meaningful to family. But so I would say start there, and then again going back to being good listeners, being able to have conversations where it's not geared around anger, but around understanding and hopefulness.
So what do you think if I know the book is built around these framing questions, right? Like, the Before You Say I Do is, and I wonder what the framing question would be for, maybe they're already married. Like I know in my congregation, there are a number of multi-faith families, some of them where you have if a Jew and a Christian's married, they'll participate in a synagogue and a church.
Yes.
And there are all sorts of different ways to do it. But how do you think we should frame the question in helping them, assuming they'll talk in respect? How do you frame that question that can, where when they answer it and wrestle with it, they're moving towards the ability to, celebrate the family and lead in faith and such together?
Might be something as simple as asking, what is the most important aspect of your faith that I can help you to celebrate or to shape, and then vice versa. I mean, how can we do this together? What are the things that you think that I should participate in? What things do you want to do on your own? What are those traditions that can shape our family, traditions that can shape our home, and then the conversations that we're having together. What do those look like? What do they sound like?
Mm-hmm. Well, I wonder if part of that, regardless of how the conversation goes, especially when you start to think of kids, if one of the things we learn in seeing in interfaith dialogue is that a lot of Christians are unaware of the actual content of their faith, that maybe the answer to leave off the table is, well, let's just let them grow up and they can decide when they get older, right? That part of the depths of any religious tradition, regardless of which one it is it comes by actually being a part of the community and practicing Absolutely. It and letting that community shape them. And in the book, I think you show ways all the different religious traditions of the world have places of contact with Jesus that lead to beautifully shaped lives. But that decision, and I've heard it from a lot of parents, where they want to be, they don't want to be partisan, right? When raising their children, they just want to teach them to, be nice, love people, be spiritual however you want. And then, later we'll see, where the free agent for the Spirit goes. And I think that to me seems more problematic, because you wouldn't get to the point in each religious tradition you highlight in the book without like digging in one of them's wells down to the underground river of sorts.
You're right. And I think that's why there needs to be that conversation from the beginning. How will we shape our children's lives, and what is it that we want to offer our children? What do we want to provide our children in terms of education and understanding, and how will our daily lives, how's our traditions through the year, how are these things going to shape what our family looks like? So, yeah, I think couples do have to be very aware of that. You're right. I mean, you just can't wait and say, well, let's just let them decide when they become a little older. Obviously, most times when that happens, the children are like, well, I don't have anything, any way to shape a decision, because I haven't been taught anything, haven't been shaped in any tradition.
Mm-hmm. So what are you working on now? On top of being a full-time minister in your 36th year, what writing wise are you working on?
I am finishing up a book currently for our Upper Room Arm Publishing House. A new, what's called Blue Christmas worship service for those who suffer with depression or feelings of loss or pain during the Advent Christmas season. And then I've also finished up a family memoir. I really enjoyed writing this memoir. I don't know if it'll be published, but I really enjoyed writing it. It was kind of a gift to my family. And we'll see what happens with it. But sometimes you just have to write for fun.
Mm-hmm. So as a minister who gets to interact a lot, because of just being able to connect through publishing and stuff, what do you think are the questions that we as leaders in the church should be concerned about, and which ones should we just not waste too much energy on?
In terms of what's questions currently?
I think a lot of ministers and a lot of Christians will put particular questions on their front burner, and they run all the liquid out, and then it just starts burning and smelling, and then there's like real important questions that don't get our attention. And I've just found that when I interview people like you that are like in the day to day of a congregation, but also have a public platform and interact with, a bigger spectrum of ministers from the church all across because of their writing, they usually have, insights as to where we should be, putting our energy and places, not to.
Well, I really am engaged right now, fascinated by the discussion that I find that's taking place in the church right now around what it means to be a Christian community. Mm-hmm. There are those that are advocating. I know this is a really big conversation right now, advocating that we pull out, in a sense, with society. We become, communities unto ourselves, and that's where we find the shape of Christian community. And then there's others, of course, that are on the opposite end of that spectrum, saying, no, we're called to be in society. We're the salt. We're called to be the light. I love those conversations because I really do think that those are the questions today that are shaping the church, and particularly around how do we grow Christian community. I think that we're seeing some of those questions being answered in terms of, the difficulty of church today. I mean, just that people aren't, for example, attending worship as regularly as they have in the past. And there's a lot of different other ways that we see the shape of that. But and going back to maybe one of your earlier questions about family. What does it mean to be a family? Is family just flesh and blood, or are we talking about something spiritual, something that's shaped through our baptism? Mm-hmm. And then how do we live that out?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a great question, and I'm glad I asked. So thank you for taking the time to hop on online and hang out. And I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next, because I don't know why people wouldn't want to read a memoir. Like I like memoirs of people that are honest, and usually ministers. If people can listen to your sermons after the 7th or 8th one, they have to learn to include your own confession of sin. So the ministers that survive are ones that are very, very confident in their depravity. So those memoirs tend to be helpful.